Good afternoon, my friends. We are filming this episode of Your Leader's Edge over Memorial Day weekend, and I want to do a special talk today about gratitude and just a brief history of our country and the thousands, hundreds of thousands of men and women who have sacrificed so much for each of us. So Memorial Day is one of the 3 days in our calendar year set aside specifically for the military. We have Armed Forces Day, and that's the day we thank the people currently serving. We have Veterans Day, and that's the day we thank people who have served in the past. And Memorial Day today is a day that we remember those who have gone before. They're either killed in battle or have served and have died. And in my opinion, Memorial Day is one of the most important days of the year because so much of what we have is built upon the sacrifice of those that have gone before. Now, Memorial Day itself was celebrated early on in our nation's history. In the 1880s, we can see different memorials around the growing nation. It was called different names for a long time. It became an official federal holiday in 1971. It was usually held on May 30th and then later on moved to the last Monday in May, and that's currently where it stands. And what I want to do in this talk is give a brief history of the major conflicts in our nation and share one or two people or groups of people that sacrificed so much and use them as a role model of the kind of sacrifice that we are memorializing today. So I want to take you back to the War of Independence, the Revolutionary War. The colonies are being oppressed by Great Britain, and there's heavy taxation. And the phrase of the time was taxation without representation. They didn't have a chance to vote on what was being handed to them. There's a growing frustration. And one of the major outbreaks that is now considered the beginning of the Revolutionary War was the Boston Massacre. The Boston Massacre occurred on March 5th, 1770, and marks the beginning of the Revolutionary War. Now, the very first person killed in the Boston Massacre, thus, the very first person killed in wars to make our nation great, is a man named Crispus Attucks. Crispus Attucks was a black man. He was trying to build a life around Boston. He was part of the group that was protesting against the British government and the oppression, and he was shot and killed by British soldiers, marking the beginning of the fight to free our nation and marking the first person who gave his life in military combat for our country. We all know about George Washington. George Washington is claimed the father of our country, and he is rightly deserving of that moniker. The more I've learned about George Washington, the more I realize what an incredible leader he was. He took a ragtag group of businessmen and farmers and shopkeepers and merchants and helped them defeat the largest and most powerful army and navy on the planet, freeing our country. And that's how our nation began. Soon after that, we go to the Civil War. Civil War is a conflict between the North and the South, and it was a conflict over states' rights and slavery. And obviously the central figure of the Civil War is Abraham Lincoln. And in my video last week, I talked about Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, who was an incredible leader, and he sparked one of the great battles in history, the Battle of Little Round Top, part of the Gettysburg battle. But I want to talk about another person in the Civil War here. Today I want to talk about Robert Smalls. Robert Smalls was born into slavery, and he was conscripted by the Confederate Army to work on a boat, and he became a very good pilot of a boat. Even though they wouldn't call slaves pilots, they didn't give him that honor, that title. He became very good, and then one day he tried an incredibly brave escape. In the pre-dawn hours of May 13th, 1862, while the white officers and crews slept in Charleston, Smalls and a group of 8 men, along with 5 women and 3 children, including his own wife and 2 kids, they quietly slipped the Planter, that was the ship they were on, out of Charleston Harbor. And over the next few hours, Smalls successfully navigated the ship through 5 checkpoints, offering a correct signal to pass each, headed out into open waters, and to the Union blockade, where he could have gone under fire from the north, but he was able to signal them that he was a friendly vessel, and he went on to fight for the Union Navy, becoming a very successful ship captain, and then afterwards became a wartime hero and spokesman, and eventually he became a brigadier general and a congressman in our Congress. Lots of great stories coming out of World War II, or out of Civil War, sorry. And that does lead us to World War I and World War II. In World War I, the person I'd like to talk about is Sergeant Alvin York. York would make his name on October 8th, 1918, in a famous incident in the Argonne Offensive. But before that, it's interesting to note that Sergeant York, who became absolutely famous after World War I, he was actually a peace lover, and he went into the war against his will. He was a conscientious objector. He's a very devout religious person. But once he realized what was going on in Europe, he decided to fully embrace his defense of our country. So there on that day, October 8th, 1918, he and around 17 other Americans, they had captured some German troops, and they found themselves under heavy fire from enemy machine guns. 9 of the Americans were quickly wounded or killed, but York was a great shot from his days as a turkey hunter. He escaped unscathed and began picking off the German gunners. Pretty soon there was a large offensive launched his way. He killed most of them single-handedly and got the rest of the Germans to surrender. All in all, this is amazing. York and his men, they captured 132 enemy soldiers. For his efforts, he was awarded the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, and several other citations for bravery. After that, he went home, Tennessee, and just became a farmer and worked on education in his surrounding communities. Alvin York is just another example. As I looked up just a lot of people, some I knew and some I discovered in preparing for this talk. These are just ordinary people, school teachers and farmers and shopkeepers who gave their life in service to our country. So that was World War I. World War II, largest war in history, obviously for us, began with the attack on Pearl Harbor. This was another war caused by German aggression. World War I was the same way, Germany and Austria. World War II, because of the humiliation Germany suffered in World War I, Hitler was able to take that and raise the German consciousness out of shame and establish his Third Reich, starts marching across Europe, devastating Europe. We enter World War II after Pearl Harbor and join with the Soviet Union and Great Britain, and ultimately stopping Germany and Japan. 2 people I'd really like to focus on in World War II. One that stood out to me is Audie Murphy. And I grew up hearing legends about Audie Murphy, who was a famous actor after World War II. He entered World War II illegally. He got his sister to forge documents for him, and he was so passionate about helping the cause. He saw, like many of us saw the attack on New York on 9/11. He saw Pearl Harbor and wanted to do something about it. He was an American soldier, actor, songwriter, rancher, one of the most decorated combat soldiers of World War II. He received every military combat award for valor available from the U.S. Army, as well as French and Belgian awards for heroism. He received the Medal of Honor for valor at age 19 for single-handedly holding off a company of German soldiers for an hour in France in January 1945. Then he led a successful counterattack while wounded and out of ammunition. His story here at just age 19 is very inspiring and remarkable. I mean, he grew up with hard situations. His father abandoned him. His mother died when he was a teenager. He left school in 5th grade to pick cotton and to support his family. And his skill with a hunting rifle obviously helped him in World War II. The other person I really want to focus on in World War II is Rosie the Riveter. Now, I understand Rosie the Riveter doesn't necessarily fit what Memorial Day is about, people who lost their lives in combat. But I thought about the American woman during World War II, and I grew up hearing their stories from my mom, who grew up at this time And I've always been amazed and proud of how the women at that time went from housewives to working in industry in the factories and producing a lot of the industrial things necessary for our wartime supplies over in Europe. And the sacrifice these women made and the skills they learned was impressive. And so Rosie the Riveter was based on a real person, but became an icon for the American woman, just sacrificing her life to support all the efforts in World War II. And so I've been amazed by what Rosie the Riveter stood for and stands for. And after World War II, of course, that's what launched American women going into the workforce, into the workplace. And now today I get to work with amazing female leaders all around Pierce County who are establishing businesses and leading teams. And all of you amazing women, you can give thanks to Rosie the Riveter because she paved the way for you. And that leads us to the Korean War and Vietnam. And I recognize these two wars aren't as popular, if you will, as World War I and World War II. Vietnam was protested in the 60s and 70s and was a very unpopular war. I'm not here to talk about any of that because the sacrifice those men and women gave is just as real. And the sacrifice they laid down and the love for their country and their fellow soldiers was incredible. The person that stood out for me in the Vietnam War, there's so many, and I grew up, hearing the stories from my stepdad and his friends. The man that stood out for me here was Carlos Attucks. And I grew up learning about Carlos Attucks because of his incredible skills as a sniper. And his overwatch, I can't imagine how many hundreds, probably thousands of lives Attucks saved just by maintaining overwatch and taking out so many Vietnamese snipers. He is one of the legends still to this day behind our sniper training for the Marines, Navy SEALs, and all kinds of special forces. And anytime you see a movie about an American sniper taking out another sniper by shooting through their rifle scope, well, that came from Carlos Attucks. He's the legend behind that kill, taking out a Vietnamese sniper who went by the nickname Cobra and who was responsible for killing many, many of our men. And that brings us to the Gulf Wars and Desert Storm. And these are the wars and battles that we have grown up with here. And I have many friends, clients here in this area that fought in these wars and lost men and women in these wars. So if you're watching this video and you lost family or friends, brothers, sisters in these combats, I know this is very personal for you. And I say the same thing for any of my Vietnam veteran friends who lost people in the Vietnam War. My heart goes out to you. And I know many watching this today will have lost loved ones, brothers, band of brothers in the Gulf Wars and Desert Storm. Many, many situations stand out in Desert Storm. The one that I know the best is Lieutenant Michael Murphy. Lieutenant Michael Murphy grew up with a nickname, the Protector, in high school, and that certainly fit him. And he went in and joined the Navy SEALs and became just an incredible SEAL, fighter, naval officer, deeply loved by everyone that he served and was around. Lieutenant Michael Murphy gave his life. He led a team of 4 into Afghan territory, hunting down a famous Taliban commander who was notorious for vicious attacks on American soldiers and on schools. And this is the scene made famous by the movie Lone Survivor. And Lieutenant Michael Murphy was one of those killed in that battle with dozens and dozens of Taliban soldiers. I came to know Michael Murphy long before the movie Lone Survivor came out. I came to know him because I led a CrossFit box for a long time. And the CrossFit WOD, or workout they known as Murph, is a famous CrossFit exercise. And so I got to know him when I learned what Murph was. So Murph, the exercise starts out with a mile run and then 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 squats, finish with a mile run, and it's all done with a 20-pound vest on. So that's a Murph. And every single Memorial Day today, there's going to be thousands of CrossFitters around the world doing that workout in honor of Lieutenant Michael Murphy and his sacrifice. So that brings us up to the latest casualties that I could find. The latest casualties that I know of are Sergeant First Class Javier Gutierrez and Sergeant First Class Antonio Rodriguez killed in action in Afghanistan just a couple months ago, giving their lives for the latest round of defense and protection against Taliban forces. So, all the way from Crispus Attucks to Gutierrez and Rodriguez, roughly 667,000 men and women, soldiers, have given their lives bravely for our freedom. There's so many more stories. I could talk about the Buffalo Soldiers. I could talk about all the nurses that have served on the front lines through all these wars, giving their lives. I could talk about story after story after story of heroism and bravery, paving the way for us today. The point of all of this is this. I wanted to give just a rough, brief history because we're losing sight of our history and how we got here. From the Revolutionary War to today, I want to just give a rough outline and focus on maybe one or two people in each of these combats that gave everything for us. And my point of this is twofold. One, to remember how we got here. And two, to be thankful moving forward. My point is this. Every day I get to work with leaders, and these are amazing men and women that are building families and lives and businesses and leading teams, and they're building their dream. Well, I want to remind you, we are able to build our dream because of the foundation laid for us by others who gave so much. So as we move forward out of Memorial Day, I hope that each and every one of us will be incredibly grateful for the gift of today, the gift we have to build, to dream, to hone, to serve. That gift was handed to us by others coming before us, and I hope that we will hand that same gift of gratitude, humility, and sacrifice to the generations coming behind us. Happy Memorial Day. Be grateful for what you have. Be thankful for the dream you were able to build, and go lead well.